Hello. Welcome to the premiere production of Undercover. My name is Dave Pauli. I'm director of the Missoula Public Library, and I'll be hosting this monthly program appearing on Missoula Community Access Television. Undercover has been produced jointly by the Missoula Public Library and by Barbara Thoreau, the owner of Fact and Fiction Bookstore. We plan to spotlight the literary world in Missoula and talk to local authors, taking a look under the covers of their books. And we'll be visiting with them and talking about a number of subjects, including what they're writing now, and just generally chatting with people. We're really, I think, privileged to have as our very first guest on the premiere show James Lee Burke. He's a Missoula author and winner of the prestigious Edgar Award. Mr. Burke, welcome to our program.
Oh, thanks for having me here, Dave. I appreciate it.
I first became aware of your work long before I ever came to Montana. I've only been here a short time, but you're nationally known, and I just thought I'd start out with a question about an award like the Edgar Award. What does that mean to you as an author? What does it mean to authors in general? How do you feel about awards?
Well, I think they're great. Seriously, it was quite an honor to receive it. I was reminded of something that Mark Twain once said. I think he was given an honorary degree at Harvard, and he said, it's wonderful to be here receiving something that I don't deserve. But the Edgar Award is a prestigious one, and I was quite surprised that my novel won it, because it was the first time that one of my novels had been nominated for the Edgar. And I really didn't think the novel was going to win. So it means a great deal, of course, to the book, and the increased readership. It's a great honor, because a lot of very good writers have won it. Agatha Christie, and I guess Elmore Leonard, Tony Hillerman, people like that. They're all first-rate writers.
How is that award determined? I don't know too much about it. Do you know the mechanism, how it's, who the judges are and how that's...
Yeah, I think there's a panel of about 5 or 6 people, and I think at least last year some 250 novels were nominated out of the thousands of crime and mystery novels that are published during the year, and then they're winnowed down to 5. And then, of course, the Edgar, there's several Edgars, but there's an Edgar for Best Crime Novel of the Year, and that's the one that Black Cherry Blues won. So I'm really proud of it.
Yeah, you should be. I know that you've just been on tour. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what going on tour for a book entails. What do you have to do, and what sorts of programs do you appear on? Do you do book signings? How does that work?
Well, yeah, all of the above. My wife and I went on a tour for Little Brown. It was 7 weeks, and we went to 18 cities and places, suburbs outside of those 18 cities, and would go to several stores a day, and we were on television and went to the newspaper offices and live talk shows. I was telling you about this one that I was on a little while ago in a Midwestern city. It was live on radio, and the fella said, well, people out there can call in and talk to Jim now, and the lines are open. 5 minutes later, he was still saying, the lines are open out there. You can talk to Jim anytime you wish. And I was on there for 1 hour, and one person called in. So you kind of find humility sometimes on a tour.
I suppose so. Well, I'm sure they all weren't like that.
No.
But,
one's enough.
Yeah, I guess. So you went to 18 cities?
Yeah. Wow. We started in Berkeley, Ho Chi Minh City, and went down the California coast and through the Rockies, the Midwest, Canada, back down through the South, the Deep South, the Southeast, Atlantic Seaboard, New York City, and home.
Wow. And do you have a literary agent who arranges all this kind of
It's done through
stuff for you?
the publisher does it. Yeah, I have a literary agent, Philip Spitzer. He and I have been together 13 years. We're real close friends. And I have a film agent, Patricia Carlin, who's a very good friend of mine too. She's been a really good friend to me as an agent and as a person.
So exactly what does an agent like that do for you as an author? How is that role?
Well, I owe a great deal to both of them, but the literary agent saw me through all the bad years. I had a lot of success when I was younger. I'd published 3 novels by the time I was 34, and with Scribner's and Houghton Mifflin and Thomas Y. Crowell, I had a lot of success as a young writer. And then I went 13 years, during which time I couldn't publish in hardback. I couldn't get anything published. I published 1 original paperback novel. And I wrote during that time. I wrote several books, and I published almost all of them. I still have 4 that remain unpublished. But I just couldn't publish at gunpoint. And this agent that I found 13 years ago, Phil Spitzer, stuck with me through most of those bad years. And it was hard on him because he wasn't making any money. And I feel very indebted to him today. He's quite a guy. I have the only literary agent that goes mugger hunting in New York City. When he has a bad day, he jogs along the northern rim of Central Park. I'm not kidding you. He actually does that, baiting these guys out of the bushes. He's an ex-boxer. He'll tear them up.
And you also have a film agent. Is that something new?
No. It's I found her through a friend of mine, the novelist Robert Butler, and her name's Pat Carlin, and she's just a great lady, and she's been my agent for 4 years. But she also became interested in my work when no one else was interested in the film representation, and she was. In fact, 2 big agencies had passed on my work. They just weren't interested. They read it all and said they just didn't think it had much potential. They passed on the Neon Rain, the Convict, the Lost Get Back Boogie, and Pat read them and said she was going to place them, and she has. She's made two sales for me, and they were. The last one is it's a really good situation. The novel is A Morning for Flamingos. It's in they've already started development.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's exciting.
Oh yeah, it is.
How do you feel about your books, which are almost like children, I would suspect, in some ways, being made into film? Do you feel apprehensive that they're going to do something with it that you won't like, or?
No, because I'm writing the script.
Oh, wonderful. Great.
But they're nice people. They really are, and we all agreed on the direction. I mean, the goal of the script and the characterization and the storyline. They haven't changed anything. They really want to do it as it was written in the book, and it'll be filmed in Louisiana, and they're going to spend quite a bit on the production of it. It's going to be a really good film. I know it. Yeah.
And do you have, then, as scriptwriter, do you have any say over the casting or anything in that regard?
Well, no, I don't. But the actor who's playing the lead is the co-producer. You see, so actually it was he who initiated the acquisition by the production company. So he's very good, and I have confidence in what they'll do with it.
Oh, we'll look forward to that. I wanted to ask you a little about reviews and how you personally feel about reading reviews. Do you read reviews of your own work that appear in the New York Times Book Review or any other
sure.
major sources? And how do you respond to those, and how do you feel about it?
Well, I've been very fortunate because the reviews for the last few years have been very good. Years ago, I wasn't always as fortunate. I always write thank you notes to people who write nice reviews because, there are a lot of people who have to do with the book's success and their names are never known, like the editor of a work. Oftentimes, will literally put his or her career in jeopardy for an author. I have a great editor, Patricia Mulcahy at Little Brown, and she went out on a limb for me 3 times. I'm really indebted to her. But her name isn't on the book flap anywhere. But my heavens, she really got behind my work when no one else did. And I had a very good editor at Henry Holt, Rob Calley's, Malcolm Calley's son. Rob was a real good friend to me. There's some publicists who did an enormous amount for the sale of my work. And publicists usually make very little. In other words, in the book business, there are a lot of self-effacing and humble people whose own return on an author's success is quite marginal. I mean, they don't make much at it. Nobody knows their name. But every writer who's honest will tell you that well, a good editor is just invaluable. And that they do a lot. Well, you learn that as you get older. You learn that, I have at least, to listen more to an editor. When I was younger, I didn't listen very well.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Maybe that's why I went all those years without publishing anything.
Well, what about reviews? Do reviews have a real effect on sales? Does it make any difference?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, there are certain review outlets that have enormous influence. The New York Times, is a big influence on, oh my heavens, you cannot underestimate the influence the Times has. Major periodicals like Newsweek or Time Magazine certainly have an influence. Sometimes there are instances of notoriety that might propel an author into the center of media attention. But by and large, most successful novels are rather orchestrated. I mean, the marketing, the publicity, the handling of the book is orchestrated, and it has a lot to do with production and marketing budgets. And sometimes books catch on by themselves, but if a publisher doesn't get behind them, and if he doesn't put the book in the hands of the reviewers, in all probability, it's just not going to sell very well. I mean, it's unfair, but that's just the way it is.
Right. So there really is there are a number of business decisions that are made that really are separate from the artistic side of this.
And sometimes, work will catch on, it's a fluke. And the person comes along exactly at the right time with a book that's topical, and I don't know, maybe some television celebrity shows up with it in his hand in front of a camera. But by and large, it's a matter of numbers. The books have to be in the stores. See, oftentimes books don't even have a chance to fail. They never get into the store.
Right.
The chains, you see, can be quite arbitrary. Chains oftentimes just don't buy an author unless he's quite successful. And so today these mall stores are the places where the average book buyer goes. And if a fellow doesn't get his book on the shelf, he doesn't have a chance even to fail. I mean, this isn't a complaint. It's just one has to be aware of the realities of book publishing.
Sure. From a personal point of view as a librarian, do you think that reviews in library types of journals are very important to sales?
Sure.
We kind of would like to know that, I think.
Oh, without a doubt. Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Book List are the 3 most important reviews that a novel will receive before it is reviewed by the mainstream periodicals. But the trade publications, as they are called, have a tremendous influence on a novel's future. For example, a good review, a star review in Book List or in Library Journal usually ensures a sale of around 2,000 hardback copies. And that's right out of the box. You see, you're off and running. The Kirkus is influential to a degree because Kirkus tends to beat up on people a lot. So if you get beat up on get beat up on by Kirkus, you shouldn't worry about it. But if you get a good review from them, you really like to stick it on the jacket of your book, because they're kind of tough sometimes.
Right. And I know that Morning for Flamingos did get a starred review in Booklist.
Yeah, it did. It got a great review in Booklist. It's done real well. It's doing real well today.
Right.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. The reviewers have really been good to my books in the last few years. I have only one bad experience, I would say, when my novel, Lay Down My Sword and Shield, was published. That was my third book. It got a mixed review in the New York Times, and then it got bad reviews in the Washington Post and the Washington Star. And man, the publisher dropped it. They stopped the bindery, the binding process, and they canceled all the advertising. They got rattled. And then a little later down the road, the good reviews started to come in, but it was too late. They had really abandoned the book. So that's an instance in which, reviews certainly had their effect, and it was quite dramatic. It really hurt the book. And I don't say that the reviewers were wrong. I think they were.
Well, naturally, I'm sure they were.
But they did do some damage. And, it's a funny thing. I've known novelists who will review the work of other writers and be awfully hard on another writer, and I've never understood that. Because to write a book and to get it published is a great accomplishment. I mean, there's nothing harder than writing a book. And to get it published, any kind of book, is something that very few people achieve. And for a fellow writer to savage the guy's book seems to me I don't know, it's like cannibalizing one's own kind. And it usually, it turns back on him. What's the expression? What goes around comes around.
Right.
But, a book's going to have enough time, a difficult enough time surviving anyway without a fellow writer beating up on it.
Well, if we could switch gears a little bit.
Okay.
You really are now a mainstream writer in the sense you're published by a national publisher. You do these national tours. I mean, you're extremely well known, but you live here in Missoula, Montana. Is this some kind of a haven for writers?
It's a great place to live.
How do you feel about that? Does it put you out of the mainstream in any way to live out here? I mean, you're a long ways from the literary circles or the publishing world.
Well, Bill Kittredge says Missoula is the Paris of the 1990s. That's a great line. But no, this is where it's happening. In Missoula, you can throw a rock in any direction, you'll probably knock down a writer. But it's a wonderful place for an artist to live. It's an exciting place. It's probably one of the most beautiful places on the planet. It is. As John Steinbeck said, Montana's a love affair. That's a great line. Montana's a love affair. And it's like a drug. You come out here and you become addicted. As we were saying earlier, there is just no place that competes with it. You go anywhere else and man, it's an enormous yawn compared to Montana. It makes you kind of environmental elitist to live out here. But it's a great place to live and work, and it's pretty cheap to live here. And Missoula is a wonderful community. But stop and consider for a moment, most of the things that will happen in the United States tend to happen here first in the Pacific Northwest. Like the environmental issues are clearly focused in this area, and they're going to get more and more intense. The peace movement here has a large following. A lot of the, I would say, economic struggles that the nation has seen in the last 10 years, and which will probably continue into the 1990s, are quite evident here. The end of a way of life, the effects on agriculture and ranching, the blue-collar world of the Chippewa logger. We're seeing that drama take place before our eyes right here. It's not an abstraction. That Missoula is where it's happening. When you go to other places, you go back to the Midwest, as I say, it's what takes place there is a reflection of events maybe that we're seeing in a much more immediate and dramatic way right here, you know, in the northern Rockies. California used to create the prototype, and it would work its way over the Santa Ana Mountains, you know, onto the plains.
Well, I wonder if I could ask you a little bit about your writing, and I have a real strong feeling, of course, as a librarian, that it's important to encourage children to read. I just wonder if you would mind telling us about what the things that you read as a young person.
Yeah.
Were you a reader or not?
Yeah.
And what kind, if so, what kinds of things did you like to read?
Oh yeah, I read all my life. I wasn't a very good student until I got to college, but I always read. I certainly did. I loved Richard Halliburton's books when I was a kid, and I loved the Hardy Boys. And then, and I remember in high school I read Gone with the Wind. I just fell in love with that book. I still think of it as one of the greatest reading experiences of my life. I started reading Ernest Hemingway when I got to college, and I read everything that Ernest Hemingway wrote. William Faulkner, certainly, Robert Penn Warren, John Dos Passos, John Steinbeck, certainly, James T. Farrell. They all are great textbooks to study if a guy wants to be a writer.
And also, when I was reading Black Cherry Blues and some of your other books, I'm really impressed with the metaphors. Is that,
well, thanks.
Is that something that, I mean, I have this vision of it just flowing out of a writer so naturally, or is it something you sweat over to come up with a beautiful metaphor, or is it something that comes naturally? How does that
Well,
work?
I think, you know, an artist of any kind makes some kind of choice in his life, and you do not compartmentalize creativity after that moment of choice. It's like a theologian once said to me, he used a term, the fundamental option, and he said, you make a certain choice for good over evil, and after that moment, you don't measure your life by any one period, any one event. You look back at the fundamental option and you begin to think in terms of the full 9-inning game. And one's art, I think, is the same way, that you're always at work. You're at work while you're sleeping, while you're doing other things, while you're daydreaming, and the mind is always working on language. And the metaphors don't just happen while you're sitting at the typewriter. It's like, you know, this book here, if I can pull this up,
Sure.
I'm going to stick it at the camera. This is terrible. This book was rejected by 52 New York publishers. And that scene there is down in the Bitterroot Valley. I'm really proud of this book, but it was not only rejected, it was battered and flung back at me with a catapult. And I couldn't sell it. I just gave up. And my wife said, try University Press. And I sent it to Louisiana State University Press. And they brought it out to great success. The book is in its third printing now, and it's in movie development. And it was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize, the same book that was rejected all those times.
What's the difference between a university press and a major publisher or a New York publisher? I mean,
they took a chance.
They're willing to take a little risk on
they
something?
took a risk. And then it was purchased by a New York house later on. But my point is that experimentally, this is one of the best things I ever did, with the use of metaphor and a first-person narrator. It's narrated by an ex-convict hillbilly singer, but I always think of it as my long poem. I'm not a poet.
Okay, and what about, well, is it common, if I could get back to the script writing, is it common for an author to be asked to write the script for their book when it's a project in development for a film?
Well, it was a great compliment for me because I've never written one. And I told the producers, I said, look, it's like the election of Ronald Reagan as president. It's on-the-job training, and I don't know a script from a box of Kleenex. But anyway, they talked it over and said they'd like for me to give it a try. So I'm writing what they call the treatment right now. But we talked a lot. I went out there and I met with these film people. And they're very nice. They're very nice to me, and they were quite impressive.
What does treatment mean exactly?
Well, it's like an outline. You sort of indicate the direction of the script, and you create the key scenes, and you make use of material that, or you show the material that eventually you'll make use of in the larger work later.
Okay, great. Are you at work on a new book since Morning for Flamingos?
Yeah, I'm writing a 5th book in the series, and I have a couple of short stories coming out. And this collection, boy, this is, here I feel like showing my own work here.
That's fine, that's what we're here for.
This is terrible, this book here. It's a collection of stories that just came out with Little Brown, and it was originally published by Louisiana State University Press.
Okay. Well, it's really been a pleasure talking to you.
Boy, my pleasure.
Quite an honor to have you as our very first guest on Undercover.
Well,
And we really appreciate the opportunity.
it's very nice of you to have me, Dave.
And we have all of James Burke's book at the Missoula Public Library. They're almost all checked out all the time, but we can now put them on reserve if people would like us to do that. Since we have our new computer system up and running, we can reserve material, so anybody who's interested in reading any of these can come down and pick them up there. Also, I'd like to let people know that the library is going to be expanding its hours in February. Once again, due to our new automated system, we'll be able to be open an extra day. Undercover is going to be shown on the second Tuesday of each month at 8 o'clock, and then also be replayed on Wednesday. This program, anyway, will be replayed on Wednesday, January 6th at 5 p.m. if you want to see it over again. Need to thank some people for this. I'd like to thank our 2 library staff members, Betty Ammon and Karen Reard, for helping. All the other people that helped out with the production. Thanks to MCAT and O Productions for the technical work on the program. And we'll have another good person to talk to next month about books and reading. And again, James Burke, thanks a lot for being with us. And
Thanks.
I haven't read all your books, but I plan to, and I'm sure people who see this show will also.
I appreciate it. Thank you for all of you for having me.
Okay. Hello, welcome to Undercover, the show that looks between the covers of books by local Missoula area authors. My name is Dave Pauli. I'm director of the Missoula Public Library, and we're very happy this evening to have as our guest Dee McNamer, who is a local author and has just had her first novel published. Rima in the Weeds is the title, and Deidre, welcome to our show.
Thank you.
We're real pleased to have you with us, and I've just finished reading your novel and enjoyed it very much. I'd like to ask you just a few questions, and feel free to expand on whatever I've asked you about. I just wondered, first of all, generally how you're feeling about having your first novel published and all the excitement that goes with that experience.
Well, it's a big shock to me. I wrote it with really I wasn't sure at all it would ever get published. And so the fact that it did in the first place, the fact that I got a good agent, got a good editor, and got a good company has just been kind of unbelievable to me. So, and it really wasn't very real to me at all until I actually saw the book. And there it was. So it's exciting.
And you've got a tour coming up where you're going to be going to a number of different cities. It sounds pretty exhausting. Are you looking forward to that, or do you have any trepidation about that? Or
Well, I've never been in this particular position before. I have no practice at it. I have had experience interviewing people from my years working for newspapers, but I've never been on the receiving end, so to speak. And so I don't know quite what to expect, but the whole thing sounds quite wonderful to me. I'm not dreading it a bit.
Yeah, okay. This story is set in a fictional highline town of Madrid, but that's obviously autobiographical in a sense that you grew up in towns similar to what this town is portrayed as. Your characters seem to have some ambiguous feelings about their hometown, and I was wondering, does that reflect your feelings about where you grew up also?
Yeah, I would say that it does. I think that small towns set in large empty spaces give you kind of simultaneously two different messages. One is that you're in a very small, constricted place. The other is that you have a lot of possibility all around you. There's a simultaneous feelings of freedom and constriction, and it can make one feel uneasy, I think. It did me. There are many things I feel great affection for the places where I grew up, but I also wouldn't choose to live there for the rest of my life, I think, and that may be my problem. But I do feel that I always had mixed feelings, and I continue to have mixed feelings about those places.
And as far as the characters go, I was personally just very impressed with how vivid the characterizations were. Even the secondary people that were not primary to the storyline, but in particular, for some reason, the Gloria, I really had a feeling of affection and it's kind of a bonding with her almost. I'm not sure why, but she seemed to me in some ways to be a quintessential small-town person. And she why do you think she couldn't resolve the conflicts that she had there?
Well, I feel much the same way you do toward her. I feel a lot of affection for her, and I think that in some ways she is a composite of a number of people I've known, and is in some ways represents the best of or a certain kind of grit and humor and resilience that I really identify with those highline towns. People are funny, they're tough, and many aren't very precious about their own lives. they tend to look outward and to meet adversity with a kind of a spunk that I admire a lot. And so I think that she embodies a lot of that, and I wrote her that way. She also is so much a part of that place that I think that she has great qualms about leaving it, and there are good reasons for her not to leave. If she goes somewhere else, she isn't going to have what she has there, which is people who know her and a place and a history, and you lose all of those things when you go into an urban center. So she's struggling. I think that she thinks she's young and she should go, and she's bored to a certain extent, but the reasons she doesn't go aren't bad ones.
Mm-hmm. But actually, she did make an attempt.
She tried.
A moving part of the book where you described her in Portland trying to go to business school and in this small apartment, and no one knew her, and she knew when she went down to the laundromat or to the store, nobody would know her.
Mm-hmm.
It's like she was out of the womb of that nurturing place, and it was very difficult for her.
Right, and I think it is very difficult for a lot of people. And it just depends on what kinds of circumstances you find yourself in or who you find yourself with. Often if you make that jump from a small familial place to a large anonymous kind of place. And it takes really extraordinary bravery to do it on your own and continue to be there on your own, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see why she came back.
Mm-hmm. And what about your protagonist, or one of your protagonists, Dory? How was she able to get away? You know, she goes to Chicago and begins to make a life for herself there. How would you say she's different than?
I think that in many ways her inclinations are to leave from the beginning, possibly, but she left and then had a bad experience and got very disillusioned and had to regroup, so to speak, come home, regroup, figure out who she was, what that all had meant, this disastrous love affair, and what was the right course for her to take when she had gotten her bearings a little bit. And I think the right course for her is to leave. And she shares some of the traits of her mother, I think, which are she just doesn't fit very well in that town, and she should probably go back and get back on the horse that bucked her off. And that's part of her leaving, is to do that, and it's important for her to do that. If she had stayed home, having come home for the wrong reasons and just because she was hurt and stung, that wouldn't be a good enough reason for her to stay home in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see it as a triumph in some ways for her to leave at the end. Try it again.
Mm-hmm. I want to switch gears a little bit and quote you to yourself and see if, how you respond. In an interview that I read, you said that some of your literary heroes, in fact many of your literary heroes, were people you described as people who grew up out of the mainstream, but that you felt that made a difference in their writing. Are you a person who grew up out of the mainstream, and if so, what does that mean to your writing?
Well, I certainly did grow up out of the cultural mainstream,
right,
in the sense that if you grow up in a rural area or a small town, you tend not to be in close proximity to all the voices that say, here's who's good, here's who's doing it, particularly if you're trying to do something creative, write, make music, dance. You can be at a disadvantage because you don't know what's out there. But I think that there's a certain advantage in it too. If I lived in New York, I think I would be highly conscious of who was writing what editors they had, what agents they had. what their opinions were of me and who mattered, all the little alliances of power and expectation. And there's a certain blithe ignorance, even in Missoula, to be out this far and just not be terribly aware of what's expected of you. And there's a freedom in that, I think. You can become dangerously provincial, probably, if you don't read well or don't dip into larger areas from time to time. But I think that being at some remove can in some cases sharpen your eye. It can keep you from being too full of yourself. And the writers, many of the writers that I admire, do tend to come from places like rural areas or the South or Ireland, or places that aren't mainstream in that sense, in an urban sense.
Well, you've also spoken about your feelings of writing, perhaps about women as the focal point of your story, and they certainly are here, and contrasted with especially male writers in the West. And I wonder if you might just talk about that a little bit. Why do you think that's important or significant? Or
well, I think that the West is in some ways a psychological region. That it's some place that people outside the West seem to need psychologically, and that it embodies some fantasy that seems to be really attractive to a good chunk of the world, in fact. And the components of it seem to be almost exclusively the idea of the quintessential Westerner is, I think, or has been, it's changing, but in the past it's been a white male loner who is in a harsh, unforgiving environment, working out an existence that is simultaneously violent but strangely innocent. And he has developed his own code, and he lives by it. And we see all sorts of fallout from that. There's, Rambo. There are all the Hollywood westerns play on that vision, but also so do the rogue cop movies, I think. And it's just a version. It's still cowboy movies. And the problem for a woman in all of that is that I think that women have tended to be treated as forces rather than humans, if they're treated at all, as civilizers or impediments or paragons or, tamers. And I think that to some extent that's what showed up in the literature out of the region too. Again, there are many exceptions to that, but overall, if you want to write about women as complex and layered and sexual and ambiguous beings, there aren't a lot of models around out of the West, because there's this huge myth in place. And so in some ways I think that has kept women from writing, Western women, not kept them from writing, but it isn't what the world expects, the kind of story a woman would write, I think. And so until very recently, we haven't seen a lot of women talking out of this region, so to speak. There are a lot of good ones now. It's happening more and more.
Right.
But it's a pretty formidable image to come up against.
Yeah, I think you are right.
So.
It's perhaps even more so outside of the West.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Germany.
Yeah, right.
Europe.
Yeah. Well, I again want to get back to Dory Vane because I was much taken with this character, and even though I always felt like she had a great inner strength, even though she was struggling with some really difficult problems in her life, and came near to having a breakdown, or really did in some ways. But I also thought that somewhere this strength came from somewhere in her, and her family was almost, to use a current jargon word, dysfunctional. I mean, the mother had had serious mental problems. The father was a kind of a right-wing bigot. Where do you think that strength came from in her?
Well, I think that probably where she grew up, she had some models for it of I think one of the values of where I grew up was that you don't feel too sorry for yourself. A premium is put on putting one foot ahead of the other, getting out there and proceeding despite disappointment or adversity. That you, it's important to be brave and go on. And so just in the people around her, she probably got some of that. But I also think that her mother, in some ways, is not doing too well there, but she may have given her some ideas about the world as quite a large place. And just because her mother didn't fit in there didn't mean that she wouldn't have fit in somewhere else. She's just greatly at odds with that town. And so possibly the daughter, Dory, got a sense of scope from her own mother, what was possible for her. And also she's bright and she's adventurous, and I think she probably has had, growing up, a few good friends, and all of those things came together to help her during a tough time.
And now I have a question which kept recurring to me all the way through the book, is your details, and especially things like what song was playing on the radio in 1963. And how do you do that? Do you just remember that, or did you research that? How did you know that Telstar was a #1 hit in March of 1964?
I looked it up.
Did you?
No, part of it was I did my own age in 1963 was older than Margaret, the little girl, and younger than Dory. So I kind of fell in between the two main characters. In 1963, I was 12, and so I remember some. Also, I do actually. I think I remember quite a lot. But I had to go back and check and make sure that something that I remembered hadn't actually happened 2 years later, and so it was a combination of memory and research.
I think it was just great. It helped me. I'm a baby boom sort of person myself. It helped me place that story right in a real specific time.
Good.
That was great. I really liked that. I have to ask you about Holly, the town librarian. Obviously, being a librarian, even though she wasn't a major character, she jumped out at me. And she did have a run-in with Earl Vane, the right-wing John Bircher, and eventually lost her job over that confrontation. Did you know somebody like her in your town, or how did you come up with a librarian like her?
Well, I think like all the characters in this book, she's a concoction. I didn't know anybody like her, but I did. My mother was quite active in libraries in both of the towns where we lived, and there was an era there where perhaps more so than in the 70s or 80s, that the 60s were a tough time for libraries, in the sense that there was a rather virulent anti-communist move, and it often got focused on libraries in that era. And so I heard talk about people storming into libraries and demanding that a certain book be removed from the shelf. or that a certain person had communist connections. Letters would show up in the paper about certain people. It seems to me they've quite often had library connections who were a little pink. And so it was not to be taken lightly. And it wasn't hard for me to imagine a librarian, just an open-minded, well-trained librarian ending up someplace like that and running into all kinds of trouble and feeling quite alone. And so I think I made her up, but it was, I mean, I know I made her up, but it's not, her situation isn't outlandish.
Oh, no.
It happened.
It's a very perceptive
was,
leap for you, I think, and for us in the profession, we know myriad stories like that.
Well, yes, and I think librarians in small towns can be really important and even noble figures, because books are your only link in some ways to the larger culture. And if you have a librarian who is unafraid in a small town to give you what you need from the larger world, that person is an admirable person. And so in some ways it was an attempt, I think, although she's kind of a odd and funny, I hope, character, it's a kudo for a good librarian.
Oh, I thought so.
I hope.
Yeah, I certainly thought so. See, I had a follow-up question on her. Well, obviously I was a little more obsessed with her than the average reader might be, but I was very entertained also. One reviewer, and by the way, the reviews have been excellent. I don't know if do you read all the reviews you can, or how do you approach that?
I've heard about 2, and you told me about 1. So, yeah, that's been really gratifying, because you really don't know what you've got sometimes when you're done, and you may like it, but that's quite a different thing from other people liking it.
Right. Well, one reviewer called your, I'm going to quote the review, called your portrayal of Margaret, the young girl in the story, as one of the best coming-of-age stories in recent fiction. And the thing about Margaret that really interested me was this rich fantasy life. In fact, the title of the book relates to something that was kind of a fantasy of hers. And they seem to be a pretty essential part of her growing up experience with the fantasy she had about the movies she had seen and putting herself in the place of the characters. And I just wondered if those fantasies might have been based on your own experience growing up a little bit. Did you go to those kind of movies? Do you remember that kind of experience?
Oh, yeah. Of all the characters, probably Margaret is I was able to imagine her easiest. It was easiest for me to concoct her. I think that often a small town without a lot of daily stimulation, well, particularly in the years before TV, or before everybody had TV,
Right.
encouraged that kind of a life. Certainly wasn't the only kid who just invented things that went on for days. And you would go to a vacant lot, or weed-filled vacant lot, and have really elaborate, long fantasies involving half the neighborhood that would go on for days. And so it was a way of entertaining yourself and keeping yourself on board. And we didn't have TV until I was 12 when Kennedy was assassinated. And so actually, when this book ends, was really the beginning in real time of my TV time. And so I think it's not surprising, given my own experience, that I would think of a child who just normally fantasized a lot.
She was great. I want to thank you for being our guest, and I wonder if you could autograph. The name of the book is Rima in the Weeds. Author is Dee McNamer. And if you wouldn't mind doing that just on camera, this is our library copy that we're going to add to our collection. And while she's doing that, I want to just tell you a couple of things about happenings at the library. Story times for 3 to 6-year-olds are going on Tuesday evenings at 7, Wednesdays at 10:30 in the morning, Thursdays at 1:30 in the afternoon, and Fridays at 10:30 in the morning. So we've got all time periods covered. We have a special program called the Club for Middle Schoolers that meets the first Tuesday at 4 o'clock, first Tuesday of each month, to read and discuss their favorite books and authors. And a new program called Book Babies. We'll be working with babies and their parents, birth to 24 months. And babies must be accompanied by a parent. And this is many of these are made possible by the Friends of the Library, including a set of new toddler books for the Book Babies program. So I encourage people with children to think about these programs that are going on for kids at the Missoula Public Library. Again, I'd like to thank Dee McNamer for being our guest and
Thanks,
for
Dave.
autographing her book. Again, the book's name is Rima in the Weeds, and I know that people in Montana and all over the country are going to really enjoy this book. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot.